A pagan widow cares for a dying Saxon lord, using forbidden herbs. His armada appears at dawn. Elara, a silhouette against the maelstrom, felt the sea's fury mirror the tempest in her soul. Svartfjord's merciless peaks loomed, indifferent. Every gust carried the ghost of the Saxon raid, the burning longhouse, the beloved face gone cold. Her grief was a raw wound, still festering, sealing her off from the whispers of the living. Her only companions, the ancestral stones and the forbidden herbs. Tonight, the gods themselves seemed to weep. Then, a dark shape hurled onto her treacherous shore. Not driftwood, a man, a warrior. Salt-crusted, broken, his axe still clutched in a dead man's grip. Athelwulf, a name whispered on the wind from distant, hated lands. A Saxon. The very name was poison, curdling the blood in her veins. Her people, her clan, demanded vengeance, not mercy. The laws were clear. Leave him to the tide. Let the frozen earth claim him. Yet, a different current pulled at her, ancient as the rock itself. An oath, whispered by her mother, then her grandmother. A sacred vow to the land, to life, even when life was offered by the hand of a demon. His chest barely rose. He was dying. The gash across his brow pulsed with fever, and she saw not the enemy, but a flicker of a human light, barely clinging to the edge of the world. Fear, sharp and cold, pierced her heart. Discovery meant death, a traitor's grave, but the oath, it burned. Antes de continuarmos com essa história incrível, preciso te fazer alerta importante. Muitos inscritos têm relatado que o YouTube removeu suas inscrições sem aviso. Dá só uma conferida rápida no botão vermelho aí embaixo para garantir que você ainda está inscrito no canal. Não quero que você perca nenhum conteúdo exclusivo que vem por aí. E já que você está aí, deixa aquele like poderoso que me ajuda muito com o algoritmo. E me conta nos comentários, de qual cidade você está assistindo? Adoro conhecer cada pessoa incrível que faz parte dessa comunidade. Sua participação faz toda a diferença. Vamos interagir. Elara drague-lhe, grutando até a hovel. The air inside, usually filled with the scent of dried herbs and peat smoke, now mingled with the metallic tang of blood. Days bled into nights. She worked tirelessly, ignoring the screams of her own past, the burning memory of the Saxon blades. Her mother's forbidden herbs, usually reserved for the sick and dying of her own kin, now passed Athelwulf's lips. Roots steeped in ancient lore, poultices whispered over with forgotten incantations. Slowly, miraculously, the fever receded, the deep gashes knitted. As Athelwulf's strength returned, a fragile connection, unspoken and fraught with peril, began to bridge the chasm between them. He, a lord of men, reduced to utter dependency. She, a reclusive widow, offering life to her sworn enemy. His eyes, when they met hers, held a depth she hadn't expected, a silent gratitude that chipped away at the wall she'd built around her heart. They spoke little, their communication a dance of shared glances, careful movements, the rustle of straw, the warmth of the small fire. A terrible, dangerous intimacy settled in the small hovel. Then came the dawn. The storm had broken, leaving behind a sky of bruised purple and pale, nascent gold. Athelwulf's eyes, clear for the first time in days, fixed on the horizon, a sudden, horrifying clarity dawning in their depths. Elara followed his gaze. There, on the heaving swell of the iron-gray sea, a forest of masts. Swollen sails, raven black, billowed against the lightning sky. Longships, hundreds of them, an armada. The blood drained from Elara's face, leaving her colder than the Svartfjord ice. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. His fleet, the one that had swept through her valley like a plague, burning, pillaging, taking everything. The same king, the same implacable hand that had destroyed her home and reaped her beloved. He stood before her, whole and strong, the enemy she had saved, the bringer of her people's final doom. His gaze, now sharp and regal, met hers across the small, silent space. The longships crested the waves, an unstoppable tide, heading for Svartfjord. Elara, her act of compassion warring with the horror of her people's fate, watched the fleet advance. Athelwulf, lucid and recovered, also witnessed the arrival of his own armada. The hovel was filled with a silence, thick and heavy with impossible dilemmas. The silence stretched, cold and sharp as a winter blade. Athelwulf, whole and strong, his eyes no longer clouded by fever, met Elara's gaze. No gratitude, only a terrible, predatory calm. The vast armada, a moving mountain range of dark sails, surged ever closer, blotting out the nascent gold of the dawn. Elara's breath hitched, a ragged sound in her throat. Her hands clenched, nails digging into her palms. He, the enemy, she had warmed the viper in her hearth, coaxed life back into the hand that had perhaps plunged the axe into her beloved. Then his eyes narrowed, not on the fleet, but on her, a chilling flicker of something akin to memory or recognition. He lifted a hand, slow, deliberate, the movement drawing her eyes. His fingers, now strong, curled around a heavy, tarnished silver ring on his own finger. It gleamed faintly in the hovel's dim light, reflecting the approaching doom. Elara's heart seized, not from fear of the fleet, from recognition. The air left her lungs in a gasp. A sound torn from the deepest well of her being, the ring. It was her husband, Thorgil's. Unique, crafted by her own hands, given to him on their wedding day, bearing the etched symbol of their clan, a coiled serpent devouring its tail, a circle of eternal life and death. Thorgil had worn it always, even into battle. She had found his body, cold, broken, but the ring had been gone, stolen, a trophy. Athelwulf's thumb stroked the serpent, a possessive, knowing gesture. His lips, thin and bloodless, parted. "This," he rasped, his voice rough, newly recovered, but laced with an ancient arrogance, was a stubborn fight. He clutched it tight, even as his last breath fled. His gaze, sharp as a hawk's, bore into hers, revealing a chilling, undeniable truth. A good warrior, worthy of a noble death. The words shattered Elara's world. splintering it into sharp, poisoned shards. The hovel tilted. The roar of the sea became a deafening shriek in her ears. He hadn't just been there. He hadn't just destroyed her home. He had looked into Thorgil's dying eyes. He had plundered the last sacred remnant of her love, Athelwulf. The Lord she had saved, the healer of his wounds, had just revealed herself as the unwitting restorer of her beloved's murderer. The irony was a bitter draught, burning her tongue, scalding her soul. Her mother's oath, her sacred vow to life. It had brought this abomination back from the edge, only for him to gloat over his spoils, over the very token of her deepest sorrow. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with a sudden, all-consuming fury that dwarfed the approaching armada. Every fiber of her being screamed for vengeance. The herbs, the poultices, the warmth she had given him, they were not acts of mercy, but threads woven by the Norns into a trap of exquisite torment. Athelwulf, his eyes still fixed on her, saw the transformation, the fire that ignited within her. The serpent ring glinted on his finger. The fleet drew closer, its black sails like the wings of a monstrous raven, bringing inevitable destruction. And Elara, standing before the man who held the proof of her ultimate loss, knew her world had not just turned, it had been ripped apart by the very hands she had healed. The hovel became a crucible of hatred, where life and death, compassion and vengeance fought for her very soul. Elara's world had shattered. The hovel was a crucible of hatred, where life and death, compassion and vengeance fought for her very soul. A primal scream tore from her throat, not of grief, but of absolute, incandescent fury. Her hands, still stained with the lingering scent of Athelwulf's healing, clenched into fists, then lunged, not for a weapon, but for the hateful face before her. She was a storm unleashed, her nails raking for his eyes, for the throw. Every fiber of her being screamed to tear him apart, to return the agony he had so casually inflicted. Athelwulf, caught off guard by the sheer, unbridled savagery of her attack, staggered back. His eyes, moments ago filled with cold triumph, widened in sudden alarm. A flicker of vulnerability she had not seen since his broken body washed ashore. He grabbed her wrists, his renewed strength a bitter mockery of her efforts, holding her at bay, her fury twisting her face into a mask of pure, unholy rage. "Woman, cease!" he growled, his voice a low rumble. But she was beyond hearing, beyond reason. The serpent ring, mocking her from his finger, seemed to pulse with wicked glee. Then, a sound deeper than the roar of the sea rippled across the water. A single thunderous horn blast from the lead longship, echoing off the Svartfjord peaks, demanding attention. It cut through Elara's rage, a cold blade of ice against her burning skin. Both Athelwulf and Elara, locked in their desperate, silent struggle, involuntarily turned their gaze towards the menacing armada. The flagship, immense and dark as a leviathan, now lay close enough for details to emerge. Its black raven sails unfurled, a monstrous omen against the bruised sky. And then, at its prow, a figure emerged, stepping into the nascent light of dawn. Tall, broad-shouldered, clad in the dark segmented leather of a Saxon elite guard, a heavy cloak pinned by a silver brooch. But it was not the raiment that froze the blood in Elara's veins, turning her rage to a chilling, soul-shredding dread. It was the face. The face was scarred, a brutal gash running from brow to jaw, twisting one side of his lips into a perpetual snarl. His hair, once a sun-streaked blonde, was now streaked with premature gray, matted and tied back with a leather thong. But his eyes, oh the gods, his eyes. They were the same startling blue, a shade of the deepest fjord ice that had once laughed with her, held her gaze in the quiet intimacy of their longhouse, promised a future that now seemed a cruel, distant dream. Thorgil, her Thorgil, but not. A gasp, thin and reedy, escaped Elara's throat. Her hands, so recently wrapped around Athelwulf's wrists in an attempt to destroy him, now fell limp. Her heart stopped, then hammered against her ribs with a violence that threatened to tear them open. She stared, unblinking, at the impossible apparition. Her beloved returned from the grave, not as a spirit, but as a living, breathing nightmare. And then, as the figure raised a hand, not in greeting to the approaching fleet, but in a strange, almost detached signal, her gaze dropped to his other hand. It was not empty. Clutched in his scarred grasp was a smaller but unmistakable silver serpent ring, identical to the one on Athelwulf's finger. The hovel was plunged into an unbearable silence. Athelwulf, his grip on Elara's wrists now loosened, his own face contorted in a mask of bewildered shock, followed her gaze to the man on the ship, then to the ring he wore, and finally his own ring, crackled with an unspeakable horror. 2 rings, 2 Thorgils, or one Thorgil thought dead, now sailing with the very armada that had brought ruin, bearing a ring identical to the one his supposed killer wore. The layers of deception, of unimaginable betrayal, coiled around Elara, suffocating her. This was no simple vengeance. This was a blight, a twisted riddle from the very wellspring of the Norns, and her world, already shattered, splintered into a million incomprehensible fragments. The longships continued their relentless approach, but now the greatest terror was not the armada, but the man who stood at its helm. A ghost returned, and the unspeakable questions he brought with him. Elara's breath caught, a ragged tearing sound. Her vision blurred, then sharpened, focusing with horrifying clarity on the 2 rings. One on Athelwulf's finger, the other gleaming on the hand of the man on the ship's prow. Identical. Her husband's mark, a clan symbol. Impossible. Her mind screamed, a wordless torment. Thorgil, her Thorgil, alive, leading the very wolves who had devoured her world. Athelwulf, his grip still loose on her wrists, had seen it too. His head snapped back, a guttural sound escaping his throat, raw with disbelief. His eyes, fixed on the figure at the prow, no longer held bewilderment, but a dawning, shattering horror. The cold triumph vanished, replaced by an agony that mirrored Elara's own, yet was distinct, primal. "No," he rasped, a strangled whisper, barely audible above the rising wind. His hand, still wearing the serpent ring, trembled violently. He lifted it, pointing not at the fleet, but at the figure now unmistakably visible against the bruised dawn. "Brother, Torgil?" The words hung, thick with unspoken history, heavy as funerary stones. Elara felt the hovel spin. Brother. Not just a Saxon lord, not the killer of her love, but a brother. Two sons of the same blood, each bearing the serpent ring. A family crest? A symbol of shared shadowed lineage? The world twisted. The silver piece Athelwulf had clutched, claimed from Thorgil's dying hand, was not a mere trophy from her husband, but from his own kin. He had fought his own blood, believed him dead, and now saw him returned, not as a spirit, but as the implacable leader of this devastation. The man on the longship, Thorgil or his ghost, did not respond with words. Instead, his scarred face, now visible in brutal detail, twisted. His hand, bearing the other serpent ring, lifted again, this time a clear, cold signal to the hundreds of ships arrayed behind him. A single, short, sharp movement. Not a greeting, a command to advance. The black sails swelled, caught the building wind, and the armada surged forward with renewed, terrifying speed. Athelwulf stumbled back, releasing Elara entirely. He moved to the small, grimy window, pressing his face against the glass, his breath fogging the pain. His words, when they came, were not for Elara, but for himself, a desperate, broken prayer. By Odin's eye, you live, and you sail for Svartfjord. His voice was laced with a chilling, dawning understanding, as if the purpose of this raid, this immense armada, had just become brutally, personally clear to him. The long-sought prize, the ancient, whispered objective. Not just conquest, not just plunder, but this. Elara stared at Athelwulf, her mind reeling. The man she had saved, her supposed enemy, was intertwined with her deepest pain in a way she could never have imagined. He had not killed her Thorgil, but his Thorgil, his own brother. A fight whose history was now suddenly, horrifyingly, entangled with her own. The hovel pulsed with the unspoken truth, a venomous secret that dwarfed even the approaching fleet. The sacred oath she had upheld, the life she had salvaged, had brought not just her beloved's murderer, but his estranged kin, back into the world to orchestrate her final ruin. "He is not Thorgil," Athelwulf rasped, his voice raw, stripped bare of all arrogance. He turned from the window, his eyes wide, vacant, staring past Elara, as if seeing a vision of pure terror. "Not as you knew him. Not as I knew him. This is something else." His hand, still clutching the serpent ring, trembled violently. "When we fought, deep in the shadowed valley, he was already changed, twisted. His eyes held a light that was not his own. A cold..." He spoke of Svartfjord, not as a land to conquer, but as a place to awaken, to free something ancient. Elara's breath hitched. Free what? The words were barely a whisper, swallowed by the rising wind that now carried the heavy scent of salt and death from the approaching fleet. Athelwulf's gaze snapped to hers, sharp with an agony that seemed to rend his very soul. The Serpent of Svartfjord, an elder god, a forgotten power, imprisoned beneath these very peaks since the dawn of time. Our ancestors, a dark sect within our clan, they sought to bind it, to control it. The rings. He lifted his hand, the silver glinting. They are not merely symbols of lineage. They are keys, vessels. And Thorgil, he was destined. The eldest son, the vessel of choice. The hovel groaned under the weight of this unspeakable truth. Elara stumbled back, hitting the rough-hewn wall. Her Thorgil, her laughter, their love, all of it a prelude to this? Her heart, already shattered, was pulverized into dust. The man she had nursed back to life, the Saxon Lord Athelwulf, now delivered a truth more devastating than any axe blow. He had tried to kill his own brother, not for spoils, but to prevent an apocalypse. And she, in her blind compassion, in her sacred adherence to life, had unknowingly saved the only man who could stop it. Only for him to reveal that the path she had taken had led straight to the awakening. The fleet was closer now, the thud of its oars against the waves, a terrible heartbeat. The figure on the prow, her Thorgil, raised his axe again, but this time the movement was not a salute. It was a single, sweeping gesture, downwards, towards the heart of Svartfjord, and as he did, a low, resonant hum, impossibly deep, vibrated through the earth itself. The very stones of Elara's hovel seemed to shiver. A thin, greenish light, sickly and ancient, began to emanate from the Svartfjord peaks, pulsing faintly, then growing brighter, casting ghastly shadows across the dawn sky. Athelwulf's face was chalk white. "It begins," he whispered, his voice trembling with a terror that clawed at Elara's own throat. "The serpent stirs. They have come to break the ancient bonds, to unleash the elder god upon the world. And Thorgil, he is the bridge, the final sacrifice, and the first. You, Pagan Widow, you did not save a Saxon lord. You healed the keeper of the second key. And now, the gates of Helheim will truly open." His eyes, filled with the reflection of the sickening green glow, met hers. "This land, your people, they are merely the first morsel for what comes." The hum intensified, a deep, primal groan from the earth. The air grew thick, heavy with an unseen presence. The black ships, now mere shadows against the deepening, malevolent green sky, prepared to unleash their warriors. But the true battle was not against the Saxons. It was against the ancient, waking horror they had unwittingly brought to their shores. And Elara, caught between two brothers, one a victim, the other a monstrous harbinger, stood on the precipice of an oblivion far greater than any Viking raid. The oath of life had led to the unleashing of ultimate death. This land, your people, they are merely the first morsel for what comes. Athelwulf's words, a death knell, echoed in the hovel. The sickly green glow from the Svartfjord peaks intensified, painting his face in a grotesque, spectral light. His eyes, fixed on Elara, held a fresh wave of terror, raw and dawning. The Serpent of Svartfjord. It is not merely imprisoned beneath these peaks, Pagan Widow, he rasped, his voice a strained whisper, barely breaking the mounting hum from the earth. It is these peaks. It is the very heart of your sacred land. And your clan, your bloodline, they are not merely its guardians. They are its chosen keepers, its jailers, its tethers. Elara's breath hitched. Her clan, her ancestors, the ancient vow. It wasn't just about preserving life. It was about containing this horror. The coiled serpent, her clan symbol, tattooed on her own skin, pulsed with malevolent energy. Athelwulf stumbled closer, his voice urgent, desperate. Thorgil, my brother, he sought you out. Not for love, not for conquest. He sought the key within your blood, the power woven into your ancient rituals, the serpent ring. It wasn't just your clan symbol. It was the mark of the bind, the tool of its suppression. Your ancestors, they didn't just worship life, they imprisoned death. And Thorgil, he was destined, yes, but not by our gods, by the twisted whispers of the elder god itself. He was groomed to tear that bind asunder, to use your heritage against itself. The hovel groaned, the hum now a physical pressure against Elara's skull. The green light outside flared. Athelwulf snatched her hand, his fingers cold against her skin. He pointed to the serpent ring on his own finger, then to her wrist, where her clan tattoo coiled. And the echo of your clan's binding magic, the only remaining link once Thorgil had severed his own. And you healed me. You brought the keeper of the final link back from the abyss into the very crucible of its awakening. His words, a torrent of horrifying truth, shattered Elara's world for the final time. The compassion, the oath, her mother's legacy. It was all a monstrous deception, a cruel snare laid by time itself. She had not saved a man. She had completed a ritual. She was not a victim of circumstance. She was the final, unwitting sacrifice. Her bloodline, meant to guard, was now the very tether to unleash. Outside, the green glow erupted, a blinding, malevolent sun rising over Svartfjord. The hum intensified into a deafening roar, a sound that seemed to rip the very fabric of the world. The longships, dark silhouettes against the hellish light, were no longer sailing. They were surging, riding a wave of raw, ancient power. And at the prow of the lead ship, her Thorgil, his scarred face illuminated by the ghastly light, raised his axe high, not in salute, not in command, but in a horrifying, single, downward cleave directly into the heart of the glowing peak. The earth screamed, and Elara knew, with a certainty colder than the fjord ice, that her love, her life, and her entire world were merely the final, necessary offering to an awakening far older and far more monstrous than any saga could ever tell. The Serpent of Svartfjord was not just stirring, it was devouring its own tail, and Elara was caught within its inescapable coil. The Serpent of Svartfjord was not just stirring, it was devouring its own tail, and Elara was caught within its inescapable coil. The earth screamed. Outside, Thorgil or his ghost, a silhouette against the hellish green glow, brought his axe down into the heart of the mountain. Elara stumbled, falling to her knees, expecting the ground to split, the world to end. But the hovel merely shuddered. The deafening roar intensified, a primordial scream from the very bedrock of Svartfjord. And through it all, Athelwulf's words, a monstrous prophecy, clawed at her. This land, your people, they are merely the first morsel for what comes. Then a sound, distinct from the earth's agony, a low, guttural chuckle. Elara's head snapped up. Athelwulf. He was no longer pressed against the window, his face etched with terror. He stood now, in the center of the small hovel, bathed in the malevolent green light, a chilling, triumphant smirk twisting his lips. His eyes, moments ago wide with supposed horror, now burned with a cold, terrifying intelligence. A predator's gaze. Morsel. Yes, he rasped, his voice no longer trembling, but deep, resonant, brimming with an ancient, unspeakable power. But not for it. For me. Elara's heart stopped. No, the world tilted. She stared, unblinking, as Athelwulf slowly, deliberately raised his hand. The serpent ring, Thorgil's ring, his brother's ring, pulsed with the sickening green light, a beacon of malice. You pagan widow, he continued, his words slicing through the roar. In your boundless compassion, in your sacred adherence to life, you did not just heal a wounded lord. You gathered the scattered threads of power. You ignited the forge. You delivered the final spark. His gaze bored into hers, a pitiless, mocking triumph. My death on your shores was no accident. A necessary shedding. My brother, Thorgil, a stubborn fool, he fought with a blind ferocity. He thought to bind the serpent, to control it through the rings. He thought he was the destined vessel. A convenient deception, a useful sacrifice. Athelwulf laughed then, a dry, rasping sound that turned Elara's blood to ice. But the Serpent of Svartfjord, it yearns for a true champion, not a binder, a liberator, and it needed the purity of your clan's binding magic to break free, not to be contained. He stepped closer, the green light coalescing around him, making his form shimmer, shift. The second key I spoke of, it was not a mere link. It was the activation, the touch of a true tether, a guardian of the bind, was needed to fully awaken the power dormant within me. Your hands, Elara, your ancient blood, your foolish kindness, they fed the beast. They broke the chains from the inside. The serpent ring on his finger flared, its green light now blinding. The hovel filled with a crushing pressure, the hum becoming a deafening roar within Elara's own skull. The peaks of Svartfjord pulsed, and she saw, not the mountain, but a monstrous, ancient eye opening in the very sky. Athelwulf's features contorted, stretching, his skin shimmering, his form growing taller, broader. The face of the man she had saved, the man who had stolen her husband's ring, dissolved into something vast, terrible, inhuman. You, Elara, a voice boomed, no longer Athelwulf's, but myriad, ancient, echoing from the very heart of the unleashed horror. You were the final lock. And now, the true Serpent of Svartfjord rises, reborn through me. The hovel exploded outwards, timbers splintering, rocks crumbling. Elara was flung back, the raw, unleashed power of the Elder God tearing through the air. The black ships on the fjord, dwarfed by the immense, green glowing form now manifesting from the very peak of Svartfjord, were flung like toys. And at the heart of the nascent monstrosity, Athelwulf, or what remained of him, stood, arms outstretched, not a man, but the conduit of an awakening that would devour the very world. The true horror had just begun. The Serpent of Svartfjord was not just stirring, it was devouring its own tail, and Elara was caught within its inescapable coil. The earth screamed. Outside, Thorgil or his ghost, a silhouette against the hellish green glow, brought his axe down into the heart of the mountain. Elara stumbled, falling to her knees, expecting the ground to split, the world to end. But the hovel merely shuddered. The deafening roar intensified, a primordial scream from the very bedrock of Svartfjord. And through it all, Athelwulf's words, a monstrous prophecy, clawed at her. This land, your people, they are merely the first morsel for what comes. Then, a sound, distinct from the earth's agony, a low, guttural chuckle. Elara's head snapped up. Athelwulf, he was no longer pressed against the window, his face etched with terror. He stood now, in the center of the small hovel, bathed in the malevolent green light, a chilling, triumphant smirk twisting his lips. His eyes, moments ago wide with supposed horror, now burned with a cold, terrifying intelligence. A predator's gaze. Morsel, yes, he rasped, his voice no longer trembling, but deep, resonant, brimming with an ancient, unspeakable power. But not for it, for me. Elara's heart stopped. No, the world tilted. She stared, unblinking, as Athelwulf slowly, deliberately, raised his hand. The serpent ring, Thorgil's ring, his brother's ring, pulsed with the sickening green light, a beacon of malice. You, Pagan Widow, he continued, his words slicing through the roar, in your boundless compassion, in your sacred adherence to life, you did not just heal a wounded lord. You gathered the scattered threads of power. You ignited the forge. You delivered the final spark. His gaze bored into hers, a pitiless, mocking triumph. My death on your shores was no accident, unnecessary shedding. My brother, Thorgil, a stubborn fool, he fought with a blind ferocity. He thought to bind the serpent, to control it through the rings. He thought he was the destined vessel, a convenient deception, a useful sacrifice. Athelwulf laughed then, a dry, rasping sound that turned Elara's blood to ice. The Serpent of Svartfjord, it yearns for a true champion, not a binder, a liberator. And it needed the purity of your clan's binding magic to break free, not to be contained. He stepped closer, the green light coalescing around him, making his form shimmer, shift. The second key I spoke of, it was not a mere link. It was the activation. The touch of a true tether, a guardian of the bind, was needed to fully awaken the power dormant within me. Your hands, Elara, your ancient blood, your foolish kindness, they fed the beast. They broke the chains from the inside. The serpent ring on his finger flared, its green light now blinding. The hovel filled with a crushing pressure, the hum becoming a deafening roar within Elara's own skull. The peaks of Svartfjord pulsed, and she saw, not the mountain, but a monstrous, ancient eye opening in the very sky. Athelwulf's features contorted, stretching, his skin shimmering, his form growing taller, broader. The face of the man she had saved, the man who had stolen her husband's ring, dissolved into something vast, terrible, inhuman. "You, Elara," a voice boomed, no longer Athelwulf's, but myriad, ancient, echoing from the very heart of the unleashed horror. You were the final lock. And now, the true Serpent of Svartfjord rises, reborn. Through me. The hovel exploded outwards, timbers splintering, rocks crumbling. Elara was flung back, the raw, unleashed power of the elder god tearing through the air. The black ships on the fjord, dwarfed by the immense, green-glowing form now manifesting from the very peak of Svartfjord, were flung like toys. And at the heart of the nascent monstrosity, Athelwulf, or what remained of him, stood, arms outstretched, not a man, but the conduit of an awakening that would devour the very world. The true horror had just begun. But then, above the crushing roar, a sharp, metallic shriek. From the very peak where Thorgil had just plunged his axe, a fissure, impossibly deep, ripped through the glowing rock, not outward, but inward, as if the mountain itself was tearing its own flesh. The monstrous form of Athelwulf, still coalescing, screamed, a sound of pure agony, not triumph. The green light intensified, then warped, twisting into a maelstrom around the fissure, pulling at his reforming body. His eyes, now pools of malevolent emerald, widened in a fresh, dawning horror. No, Athelwulf's booming, multi-voiced cry was a raw, primordial scream, laced with betrayal. The fool, he did not free me. He sought to sever the heart. He was the sacrifice to rebind. Elara, battered and bleeding, saw Thorgil's silhouette on the flagship's prow, not falling, but rooted, his axe still buried deep in the mountain's wound. His scarred face, illuminated by the green agony, was a mask of grim determination, his body trembling as if channeling every last ounce of his being into the impossible act. His other hand, the one with the serpent ring, was not empty. It was stretched out, palm open, towards the chaos at the peak, towards Athelwulf, a single, flickering flame of pure, defiant blue light now rising from the ring on Thorgil's finger. Reaching for the core of the agony, the truth shattered Elara. Thorgil, her Thorgil. He was not a pawn, not a mere sacrifice for another's twisted will. He had chosen. He had been fighting, not for conquest, but for the very soul of Svartfjord, for the world itself. His armada, his apparent betrayal, the sacrifice Athelwulf spoke of, It was all a desperate, final gamble to re-imprison the awakened elder god, to chain it, not just in the mountain, but within himself. And Athelwulf's triumphant rebirth? Elara's healing had given him the strength to overcome Thorgil's centuries-long struggle, to break free just as Thorgil made his ultimate self-sacrificial stand. Her oath to life had inadvertently resurrected the ultimate death, not to be bound, but to consume the one true hero who sought to contain it. The two brothers, locked in a final, agonizing dance of destiny, one trying to contain the horror, the other the horror itself, both inextricably linked by her hands. The blue light from Thorgil's ring pulsed, fighting the malevolent green, as the mountain groaned, threatening to swallow both the demon and the hero whole. The true serpent was not just Athelwulf, it was the ancient bond between two brothers, now tearing the world asunder. The true serpent was not just Athelwulf, it was the ancient bond between two brothers, now tearing the world asunder. The green agony from the mountain's wound pulsated, a malevolent heart against the bruised past. The air vibrated with the raw, untamed power unleashed, pulling at her hair, rattling her bones. On the flagship's prow, Thorgil stood unmoving, a dark titan against the hellish light. His scarred face remained a mask of grim resolve, yet his eyes, those startling blue pools, now held a cold, unwavering focus that Elara had never seen, not even in the heat of battle. The blue flame from his serpent ring pulsed stronger, a defiant counterpoint to Athelwulf's emerald chaos, surging, not to rebind the monster, but to pull it, to draw its essence. The fissure in the peak, instead of sealing, widened, a maw opening to swallow the writhing form of Athelwulf, drawing him deeper into the groaning stone. He is not sealing it, Athelwulf's many voices shrieked, raw with a terror that transcended his monstrous form, a primal fear of annihilation. He seeks to consume it, to claim the power for himself. His words bellowed over the earth's groan. He always wanted to be the serpent, not just its vessel, but its master. He did not sacrifice for the world, Elara. He sacrificed me. Elara watched, battered and bleeding, as the horrifying truth unraveled before her, more insidious than any axe blow. Thorgil, her beloved, the protector she believed lost, was not fighting to save Svartfjord. He was fighting to enslave the very entity Athelwulf was becoming. The blue light, that flickering beacon of hope, was not a counterspell to bind the elder god, but a ritual of usurpation. The ARMADA, those black sails against the dawn, had not come for conquest or to simply unleash a monster. They had come to witness a dark coronation, a chilling apotheosis. The ancient bond between the brothers, not one of rivalry over a shared inheritance, but a lifelong struggle for ultimate dominion over the elder god. Thorgil, the eldest, the destined vessel, had never meant to be a keeper. He had always yearned to be the sole master. His feigned death, his reappearance, the very ARMADA, all meticulously orchestrated, a grand deception to lure the serpent into a vulnerable state, and Athelwulf, his own brother, into becoming the raw conduit for Thorgil's ultimate absorption. And she, Elara, with her healing hands, her mother's oath, her sacred adherence to life, had unknowingly delivered the final, necessary sacrifice. Athelwulf's agony was not the pain of being trapped, but the excruciating process of being devoured, of his monstrous, nascent power being ripped from him, piece by agonizing piece, by the very kin he had tried to prevent from unleashing it. Her compassion had forged the chain. Her hands, meant to bring life, had become the chain. The blue light from his ring flared, now mirroring the intensity of the green, as if siphoning it. The mountain screamed again, a sound of agony and raw, tearing power, as the fissure closed around Athelwulf's shifting form, pulling him deeper into the earth. The armada surged closer, their black sails now like a shroud, ready to bear witness. Elara, flung back against the shattered remnants of her hovel, realized the true horror. The serpent was not unbound. It was being reforged, and its new master, cloaked in her love and betrayal, was about to step onto the ravaged shores of Svartfjord, wielding a power born of lies and stolen divinity. The world was not facing an awakening. It was facing a new, darker dawn. The earth's last agonizing scream echoed across Svartfjord, then faded into a profound, unnatural silence. The monstrous green light, which had rent the dawn, flickered, wavered, and finally died, leaving behind a sky of bruised. Athelwulf's shriek, half triumph, half terror, had been swallowed whole, along with the nascent horror he was becoming. He was gone, consumed by the very power he sought to wield. On the flagship's prow, Thorgil's form, once a titan of grim resolve, wavered. The blue light from his serpent ring, which had fought against and siphoned the green, pulsed one last, blinding time, then extinguished. His axe, still plunged deep into the now closed peak, seemed to hold him upright for a heartbeat more. Then, slowly, with an unbearable grace, Thorgil slumped forward, his scarred face finding rest against the cold stone, his own body becoming one with the mountain he had fought to save or to master. The armada, once a terrifying forest of black sails, now drifted aimlessly on the fjord, their purpose lost, their master gone, their warriors bewildered by the silent, profound cataclysm they had witnessed. Many would abandon their ships, their hearts broken by the impossible forces at play. Thorgil, not the simple hero she remembered, nor the monstrous villain Athelwulf had painted, but a complex, driven man who had chosen a terrifying path, consumed by an ambition to master powers beyond mortal ken. He had not sought to free a demon, but to cage it within himself, or to become it, a darker, more formidable serpent than Athelwulf could ever hope to be. Her oath, her compassion, had indeed delivered a key, but not for awakening. It had been the catalyst for the final, desperate act of a brother's ambition, a sacrifice of one for the ultimate power of the other. The blood debt, the prophecy, the clash of cultures, all dissolved into the grim truth of two brothers intertwined by an ancient, terrible destiny, now fulfilled. In the seasons that followed, the memory of that dawn settled upon Svartfjord like a heavy shroud. The land, though scarred, began to heal. Elara, the pagan widow, no longer alone, began the long, quiet work of rebuilding, not just her hovel, but she simply tended to the living. Her hands, once instruments of a cosmic error, now truly instruments of solace and quiet strength. The serpent, whether truly bound or merely contained within Thorgil's stony embrace, remained silent beneath the peak. And the tale of the two brothers, Athelwulf the Destroyer and Thorgil the Conqueror, faded into whispers, twisted and misinterpreted by time, becoming merely another dark legend. Years passed. Elara, her hair now streaked with silver, watched new generations play by the fjord, oblivious to the monstrous truths buried beneath their feet. She had forged a legacy not of power or vengeance, but of quiet endurance, of life blooming even after the bitterest frost. Her mother's oath, once a curse, became a quiet, enduring wisdom, to tend to life, for life itself was the greatest and most fragile of all sacred trusts. Athelwulf's ring, still on her finger, was no longer a symbol of mockery, but a constant, cold reminder of the choices made. And so, the Chronicles of Svartfjord closed, its final chapter etched in stone and silence, awaiting the next turn of the world's great wheel. Se esta saga tocou sua alma, então escute o chamado do Skald. A nossa jornada depende da força do nosso clã, e essa força é você. Você precisa se inscrever agora, para que os deuses do algoritmo não te façam perder nossas próximas lendas exclusivas. Este é o momento de mostrar seu valor. Esmague o botão de like para alimentar nossa fogueira e inunde os comentários com suas reações sobre este final. Suas teorias são o ouro do nosso tesouro. E o mais importante, compartilhe instantaneamente este vídeo com pelo menos 5 amigos que precisam conhecer este desfecho. Apenas os verdadeiros guerreiros do nosso clã entendem a importância destas ações. Não espere nem mais um segundo.